Okay, I'm going to be demonstrating a little bit more difficult printmaking project, so if you really want to challenge yourself here, this is a good one for you. You need watercolors, you're going to need transparency paper, which is what this is here, an image, some masking tape, and a brush or two. The first step is, if you have these pan watercolors, add a bunch of water or enough water to soak into the pigment and let it sit for a while. I'm just going to use yellow, red, blue, and violet so that my colors don't bleed into each other and mix too much. And if they do, it's not going to be really muddy necessarily. The idea here is that we use the water to kind of break up this pigment, and it makes it to where you're going to have much more bold brush strokes. Like if you dip in here, you're going to get a much darker red than if you had just added, say, like a little bit of water to it, like this green. It's going to be a lot thinner. So we want to get that breaking down. Again, start off that way. That way it can kind of like work out for you. If you're using a more expensive watercolor medium, like these types of watercolors that come in a tube, you don't really have to do this step so much. You can just squirt it out into a palette, and then you can mix it up to where it's about the consistency of acrylic paint, maybe a little thinner, because those are going to be really color fast. It's going to work out well for you. You're also going to need some steel wool, and the steel wool is necessary for creating a texture on this, otherwise paint won't lay on this plastic surface. This is just copier transparency picked up from Staples, and I use it for burning silk screens and different things like that. Sometimes you can get the old school stuff that they used for like overhead projector type transparencies. The traditional way to do this is to use a plexiglass plate, arrange a painting on it, send it through a press with a lot of pressure in watercolor paper. But we're doing this the adapted way, to where you don't need all that equipment. So I'm just making scratches all over the place. If you don't have steel wool, you can try using like a 220 sandpaper. You'll be able to see the scratches in the surface. It's kind of hard to see, I think, in my video, but it should be enough texture on here to hold your paint when you start to arrange it on the surface. So what we do from there, oh, and I forgot to mention, I went ahead and taped this onto the back. That's going to help me so it doesn't slip and slide and move. So now what we're going to do is we're going to use our painting methods that we've kind of learned in the last couple of projects here. And I'm basically going to start assigning color to my figure here. And so if you notice that your paint is starting to ball up quite a bit, in other words, it avoids certain areas where you try to paint it, then you probably don't have enough texture. It's not scratched well enough, so you're probably going to have to go into those spots, clean them up, and then scratch them a little better. You should be able to see your paint over the top of this. It shouldn't be so heavy that you can't see your image though. So I'm using yellow for the skin tone, and I'm just going to paint like one section at a time. And you notice that I keep going back and stirring to make sure I get more and more pigment, because this is all about having a lot of pigment on your plate so that when you transfer it, you get a good print. Now I'm going to add just a little bit of red to this darker area on her face. And it's going to look weird for a while, obviously. And you can take some artistic license. I do. I don't want my print to look exactly like my subject. A lot of times I want to do some interesting things to kind of change it up, be painterly with it. Add just a little bit more of this yellow in here. Again, there's not much water in this paint at all. I'm just trying to keep it as thick as I can while still maintaining the watercolor. And it does have to be watercolor because it has to reactivate when we put paper over the top to print this. So what I'm going to do is continue on with this until I get to the point to where I'm ready to start adding details. So most of the face is going to be yellow and red. You can see I'm kind of avoiding the spots where I would have it a little bit darker, so that I can go in there maybe with some blue and some red, make that darker later. I don't want it to bleed out. I want this to kind of dry, this yellow in here to dry first. So I would do this when you have a good deal of time, if you really want to experiment with this. So what I'm going to do up in here is just kind of follow some of the hairlines and stuff. And I'm going to take a lot of liberty with this because I want this to really just be my own portrait in the end. So find an image that you feel like you'd want to paint, that you'd want to look at for a while, maybe something that you think you could add some things to. I can see that I'm having a little trouble in this area right here. It doesn't want to accept my paint very well, so I might go back and sand that a little bit. Go with a little bit of red under here. I'm working pretty fast, but you know, if you want to control your ink in this case, not really ink, it's watercolor, but anything that we use in printmaking tend to call it ink for some reason. And slow down a bit, you know, add some layers, add some textures, that kind of thing. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to let this dry a little bit. I'm going to go in and start adding some darker stuff in these areas here, and then I'm going to show you the next part of how I develop this imagery.